Welcome everyone for episode 5 of this podcast series. In this episode, Mrs S takes us around the 40-year history of Moor House. What services were there right at the beginning, but how has it expanded and evolved? What new services are on the horizon? And really shares some gems and inspiring anecdotes of things that really inspire Moor House and really speak to some of the core ingredients and values. I hope you find it as useful and inspiring as I did. Thanks, everyone.
Moor House has been on such a journey and such an evolution. And, we've spoken a little bit about its conception and where it started and how it started with the school. But when we're talking today, there's been such growth and expansion and innovation and creativity. I wonder if you could just give us a sense of a bit of the journey and the map, but a little bit of a flavour of those different variety of services that you have.
I've been asked this question quite a few times in the past, and it provoked my thinking about exactly as you're saying, this is where we started. Why and how are we where we are today? And I think that my immediate answer to that is that everything that we've created over the last nearly 40 years has been in response to a need that either an individual child has presented or a group of children have presented. And it's been our response to that or recognising something's missing. So we started the school in 1988, and it flourished more quickly than I expected. And yes, it took us a year or two to become established and to build trust with local authorities. And inevitably that came from our successes, which obviously I'm very proud of. And the conversations from an early point were that I had a strong view that children should not stay in what even in Moor House at that time felt a bit institutional. And I was feeling that, yes, some of our children probably would struggle in a family, and a family may struggle in the early days with them because of their level of distress. But I felt that it was really important that our children had experience of being in a family, having holidays with families. And so I came up with the idea that we should start a fostering agency. So the first thing we did was to get ourselves registered as a not-for-profit fostering agency. And we created what was then the Jane Moore Trust. And people will ask, who was Jane Moore? She was my mum, but she had passed long before the ideas of the school had come about. So although we named it after her, she didn't have the pleasure of knowing about it. So we started with the Jane Moore Trust, and we started to recruit carers. And again, the theme for me was very much value-based recruitment, consistency, and the same values needed to be embedded in the carers and the service as was in the school at that time. So we started with the Jane Moore Trust. But as things do happen, the manager that I recruited, her background had been working in permanency and working with disability.
Right.
So what happened was that when I took my eye off the ball, the Jamer Trust became a permanency fostering agency working more with disabled young people and children. But there was still a little space for some of the children that we were working with. And so it kind of grew in tandem. So some of our children would be able to go for a weekend or a holiday or at Christmas with some of our carers. But I think the preponderance of carers was very much working with learning disability, physical disability, young people. And that has continued over the years. And we started that in 1991, I think, which was 3 or 4 years after the school started. And one of the challenges that we had with it being a charity was, in fact, we couldn't limit who was going to get the benefit of the foster carers. And I was concerned and thinking, no, we need to protect this service for the children in Moorhouse. And so what we decided to do was we decided to lift the foster care service out of the Jamer Trust. And we then created what we now call JIMT. And it was still the same entity in that same staff, same structure, same carers, and still a not-for-profit organisation. But it freed us up to protect the service and to focus on the children that we wanted to develop the service for. And the Jamer Trust, for a short while, was sort of dormant, and we didn't do much with it. And then we started to recognise that some of our children were getting up and ready for leaving our service. And we also recognised that some of our children were not returning home to families or their own communities. And so we thought, right, we need to develop our service to ensure that we can offer something to children when they hit the through care age and need for that kind of service. So we had a little money left in the Jamer Trust. And so we decided, what's the next service we need? So we decided that we would create through care an aftercare service. So one of the first children that hit the age that he was thinking of moving on, we decided to buy a flat near the school. And we used the reserves in the Jamer Trust. And the young man left us and moved into the flat. And we offered support for the first, I think, year and a half, 2 years. But he did really well, and he got a job, and he was earning quite a bit of money. So we decided to sell him the flat for the same price that we had paid for it, which then gave him equity in the property. So he bought the flat from the Jamer Trust, and he stayed there for a number of years. Wow. And it meant that he had his foot on the property ladder. So the money from there that we got from selling the flat, we used a couple of more times and had the same model of buying the flat and young people moving in. We never quite got to the place where any of the young people that moved into the flat was earning enough money to take either a mortgage on, but we still carried on offering that service. And we're still in contact now with children that have grown up, used the flat, and then either returned to their own local authority or managed to get on the housing list. Because one of the challenges for our children is that there can be a negative view of them as tenants. And so we were able to give references for our children and say to the local authority, we've been their landlord for 2 years. This has been their contact. They've been able to pay a small rent. And so able to establish a reputation and some security that the local authority would take the risk and give them a tenancy. So yes.
That's so huge. It's amazing.
It worked well. But recently we've not needed any kind of flats. We're not needing that. Having said that, I'm sitting here thinking that's the next thing, because I can think of the next young man that's actually needing it. So we developed, as I say, the Through Care flat, and we started with staff, not in a formal way, but working with former pupils, although any of the young people that were in the flat would normally have a care support package, and our team would do outreach work with them. And then my CEO at that time, we were talking about the difficulty for some of our young people to get access to psychological services, and also recognising that our staff probably needed more training and more support in working with our young people, because they did have complex needs. And so we were thinking, what do we do next? So we thought psychological services. So our next step was to ask Stephen, at that point, who was with us, would he be interested in helping us establish our psychological services? And of course, the answer was yes. And I still have such admiration for Stephen, because at the same time as he was doing that and working with us and for us, he decided to do his doctorate, and he carried that burden, and you would not have known, all throughout developing the psychological services. And over time, it's grown to a team who offered support to staff, reflective practice, individual work with children and families. And it's grown to, I believe, a very credible organisational service that I'm obviously very proud of. And the difference that made to the confidence of staff, it was unbelievable. And alongside offering individual services, Stephen developed a kind of assessment tool, and we would have regular children's planning meetings and invite external social work psychologists. So there was a regular review of the care and education plan for our children. And that grew in terms of our credibility, and it ensured that we were able on a regular basis to stop, reflect and evaluate where we were at with an individual child and the progress that they were making, and identifying within the group who had responsibility for what parts of the work that was needing to be done with the children. And the psychological services has continued since an early stage in the organisation. And then as we were getting bigger, what was the next challenge? The next challenge was accommodation. So we then decided to have a headquarters. And in 2010, we rented at that point what is now the Alba Pavilion's headquarters. And we started building our support service team, HR, and we are still in the Alba building, and we still need more space and more space as we grow. And in terms of looking back over what had we already created, was there a gap? Were we needing to do more for our children that were former pupils and had moved on? And so we decided, and I think in one of my previous podcasts, I spoke about the young man who had found his mum had passed away and he had no support. So conversations in the organisation were, what can we do for young people that are either going back to their own communities and not having support, or perhaps buying a flat and are not supported. So we decided that we needed to have an outreach service that allowed former pupils to keep in touch with us or phone us if they had any levels of concern or distress or an issue in their lives. So in 2010, at the same time as we opened our headquarters, I decided to use some of our reserves to create this In Touch team. And they did everything from being in a maternity ward, holding the hand of one of our former pupils who was in labour, because the nursing staff wouldn't work with her because of her past trauma. She was a difficult patient. So the range of things that the In Touch team did at that time was, as I say, holding the hand of a lady, a former pupil in labour, taking a food parcel to a child that had difficulties in their first flat, helping with gas bills, helping with preparing CVs for jobs. So it was varied, the work that they did. And alongside the In Touch team, we also had a former pupils webpage, and we still have the Facebook page that young people keep in touch with each other, or they'll make a comment if they see a picture on the school Facebook. So In Touch, it went on for a few years using our reserves. And then we applied to the lottery, and we were very successful. And the lottery gave us nearly £500,000 for a 5-year project. So it allowed us to expand the team and to then start homemaking packages. So if a youngster was going into a flat, we would make up cutlery, dishes, and those kinds of things, food parcels, and the team expanded, and it still does similar things. And we were going along, and there was nothing else at that point that we felt that we needed to develop, and it was just about consolidating the services that we were creating and working with, and trying to make sure that we were responsive both to our own group of young people, but also responsive to former pupils. And then I think the next idea that we came up with, and again, I've mentioned it in a previous podcast, it was recognising that I wanted a theoretical perspective that allowed staff to understand the work that we were doing, to help them develop their skills, and to ensure that our young people were being worked with by a group of staff that knew what the work entailed. And we had used language like trauma. We used the language like attachment. but not to the extent that I would say that staff would confidently know this is the perspective that we're using, this is the theoretical knowledge, expertise and underpinning to that approach. And it was at that time that I went over to see Dr. Dan Hughes and was bowled over with the DDP theoretical perspective, and I just felt that was the answer. It would help me come over to Scotland with the theoretical underpinning that I could use for staff to strengthen their confidence and their skills. Yes, we started on DDP, which again has grown within the organisation to the place where we offer DDP level 1 and level 2 training externally. And I think for me that was the first real surge of our identity and our confidence of saying this is one of the theoretical underpinning perspectives that we're using, and we grew in confidence, and we were able to start taking pride in our assessments and our success with young people. And I think at that stage, I've recognised quite a surge in confidence in the team. And I think probably I would have to say that there was more evidence of the progress of children. We had provided nurture and love and consistency, but it was beginning to show that we could have pride in standing alongside other disciplines, particularly in our CPDMs, which were care planning meetings. And it felt as if, yes, that we were on the map at last. And I had always struggled with, when I visited organisations, when they said, oh, this is our approach. And either if you spoke to staff, they didn't understand, or if you were watching or analysing the service, you wouldn't necessarily see the elements of the theoretical perspective. And so for me, it was important that when we took DDP on, that we did it thoroughly. And it had to be embedded in all of our language, in all of our practice, in all of our processes. And that was a challenge because it's so easy to use buzzwords, and it's so easy to say in your brochure, this is who we are and this is how we do it. But for us, it had to be how people experienced us, from visitors, from staff, in terms of interviewing, in recruitment, everything that we were doing as an organisation. We had to make sure that, as well as using the language, that people would recognise that that's who we were. I think then we again consolidated, and we were beginning to recognise and be very proud of the reputation that we were building. It's not something that we've been very good at. We've been, I think, until recent few years, quite insular and getting our head down and just trying to be the best that we can be. And quietly in the background, our reputation was growing. And one day I got a phone call from a principal of a residential school up north. And he asked if I could go up and visit. He would like some advice. And so I went up to this school up in Butterson near Dunkeld. And it was a school for children with neurodiverse challenges. And the conversation that I had with them was that they were struggling with the care inspectorate, and they were looking for advice about some of their inspections and some of the recommendations and requirements that the care inspectorate were placing on them. But unfortunately, when I had the conversation, I realised that it was actually too late. And I said that if I could have helped, I would have. But what happened was that their board of governors decided, no, that was it. And sadly, families and children were given 1 week's notice and the school was closed. And so that was difficult for them. And it was actually difficult for senior managers in our organisations. And we had such concern for them and felt so sad that things had happened the way they had. But as we do in the Moorhouse Group, we decided, is there something that we can do? And so we decided yes. So we approached the education department and said, can we open a school again? And we got a lot of support. And so 6 months later, we established a new school in Dunkeld, working with many of the same families and children. And we decided to call the school Moorhouse Academy Dunkeld. And it was a challenge for us. It was a different group of children with a different set of needs. But we were able to establish contact with some of the senior managers and consultants that had worked with the previous school. And they stayed with us. And 6-7 years later, we now have Dunkeld Academy, and we have built up over the 6 years referrals. And so having gone from a school with an interest and an expertise in working with children with trauma, we've started to expand our expertise and our services. And as I say, we now have Dunkeld Academy. And it's a fascinating journey with them. And there are similarities, but it's been wonderful learning at my stage and my age, learning new skills, working with a different set of needs, but also recognising that there are common themes: children who need nurture, love, consistency, an expert team round about them. And so, yes, I think that some of our team who joined the team, a new team which we established in Dunkeld, were able to help with some of our systems and our approaches. And I think the thing that I'm most proud of is that some of our celebratory events were picked up by the staff that were growing at Dunkeld, prize givings, celebrating children's success, families being invited to celebrate children. So there were some events and experiences and parts of our culture that have been transferred into Dunkeld. But it's fascinating because they still have elements of them that are different, and it's so refreshing, and it's wonderful when you see two different communities but still have a common goal, still have the same values, and still have the same systems to support them. So Dunkeld has grown, and I think we're just hitting the peak of numbers, and again our reputation, and we're being recognised out there. And again, as we do, we had to be the best. And so the first thing we did at an early point was register ourselves with the Autistic Society. And we invited them in for an assessment. And we were registered with the Autistic Society. And for me, that was important. It was another accreditation, another mark of our level of skill and expertise. And so we continue to meet the requirements of the Autistic Society. But we hit COVID at that time. And as the country knows, we were isolated, and there were periods where we had to stay at home. And we recognised that some of our children, particularly the children who were day pupils at the Dunkeld Academy, were being left at home with no education and no support. And so we came up with the idea of a virtual academy. And what we then did is we established contact with pupils that were at home, and we offered teachers to do virtual learning for some of the pupils. In the Bathgate campus, because it was a residential school, we were still able to offer our children as part of the community education. And so our team in the Bathgate campus were able to carry on working and offering our pupils education, whereas the day pupils in Dunkeld, they would have been, as I said earlier, left at home. So we developed the virtual academy, and we offered it to pupils that were in lockdown at that time. And we also thought that it would be a good introduction to children that were being referred, that were struggling to leave their bedroom or leave their home. And so we started introducing the virtual academy to young people that were being referred to the school. And it's been very successful. And we perhaps started with an hour's education online. And it started to help the young pupils, the young people, understand what we were offering, reintroduce them to education, but also help establish relationships and familiarity with our team. And we built on that model, and actually now we use it to start our work with referred young people. And we actually are able to achieve children that have had 1 hour of education virtually ending up full-time as day pupils. And so again, it's been something that has grown and has had elements of it that have met a range of needs for young people. And so, yes, over time, as I said at the beginning of the podcast, most of our services have been developed in response to a need. And in the last few years, what we also were beginning to recognise was that young people referrals, the age range of our referrals were starting to go down to primary age children. And so again, we thought that it was important that we developed primary services. So both in Dunkeld, we have a primary school, small in numbers, but we have a primary school for younger children. And also in Bathgate, we have a small primary service available. And so over time, that's the journey that we've been on. And our most recent idea, again, has been response to the recognition that some of our young people who were needing a referral to the CAMS service in the National Health, or needing assessments for ADHD and autism, we've recognised that local authorities and the National Health Service are struggling. So our next venture is going to be what we are going to call the Abercorn Clinic. And so it's ready to be launched, and probably in another podcast, we will have more up-to-date information. So that's been our journey, Karen.
I love that. And I think you've so beautifully laid out, and it's not an easy thing, the sort of then, now, and a little bit of a glimpse into the future. But I think what really came across was, I love how you brought your mum into the name and into the space, but also that it's been so responsive and inspired by needs, and really trying to think about the holistic child and all the different layers of that. And you talk about acorns, and it makes me think about the seeds that have been planted and the different branches that have grown and the fruits that have come from that, and the ripples and all the bits that are still coming from that. So yeah, it's so helpful to have a little bit of a sense of how it fit together. And as you said, even in different parts of the country, there's differences, but still kind of shared identity and lessons learned and wisdom. Just for people who also might not have been involved in the history, do you have a rough sense, and numbers are not my strong suit, but a rough sense of how many staff you started with roughly when you started with the school, and how many staff roughly are involved in all these services now in 2026?
There was myself and 8 staff on day one in 1987. And throughout the group, we have over 200 plus staff across the disciplines and support services. So 200 plus at this point in time. We have 12 children's homes. We have 2 residential and day service schools. We have a fostering agency. We have an In Touch service. We have a psychological service. I don't know if I've forgotten anything along that. Oh, and we have a training academy. I forgot our training academy, which we established about 3 years ago. And again, it started for our own staff, but now it's a service that nationally throughout Scotland, we're being asked to provide services to help more care sector staff gain qualifications. So,
and I know that's so aligned with Morehouse of trying to positively spread the ripples and the impact, but to have integrity and to try to sort of infuse best practice. So in terms of numbers, do you have a sense of how many kids you started with at that first school, and roughly how many kids Morehouse has sort of supported or worked with over the years? And it's hard to quantify, but just to give people a rough sense of the involvement and the change.
I started with one child for 3 months, and she's one of the children that's now granny and keeps contact with us. And within the first year, we had up to 12 referrals. And looking at Morehouse School, we have had 1,000 plus pupils through our hands. I don't know the numbers if I'm integrating the Dunkeld Academy, but it's nearer 1,500 plus children that have been through our hands.
Which is beautiful. And we know there's, as yesterday we spoke about intergenerational, but all the other families that are impacted and influenced. So just think it's really beautiful for people to sort of see how that's grown and expanded. So, and I'm really excited to see how it continues to grow and expand. So as you were talking, I had this image of, a tree, a river, the involvement. So I hope it's given people a flavour who might just be coming in now about where it started and some of the aspirational kind of possibilities, but also I think so important how it's come from need and being responsive, and it's been a comma, not a full stop, and always looking to what more can we do, but how can we do it at a high quality and with integrity. So thank you so much for inviting us into a little bit of that distance travelled.
Thank you for asking the question, Karen.